Everyone has an opinion on Shedeur Sanders, but here's the part most people conveniently ignore. The loudest voices questioning him aren't coming from inside NFL locker rooms. They're coming from the outside. Meanwhile, some of the greatest players to ever touch the field are quietly saying the opposite, and that contradiction is starting to raise eyebrows. Because when Hall of Famers speak, it's not hype, it's experience. While social media debates whether Shedeur belongs, legends of the game are pointing out something very different. Poise under chaos, confidence without excuses, and flashes of real NFL-level quarterback play, all while operating in an environment most young QBs wouldn't survive. And that's where this story takes a turn. The public narrative says Shedeur is too confident, that he holds the ball too long, that he hasn't proven enough yet. But behind the scenes, respected voices are asking a completely different question. What exactly is he supposed to look like right now? Thrown into action with shaky protection, constant scheme changes, and little margin for error, Shedeur hasn't folded. He hasn't pointed fingers. He hasn't changed who he is. And that's the part that's quietly impressing the people who have actually lived this life. When former MVPs, Super Bowl champions, and Hall of Famers break down his tape, they're not talking about headlines. They're talking about footwork, timing, ball placement, composure, traits that don't show up in hot takes but decide careers. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If this many all-time greats are willing to publicly defend a young quarterback this early, it usually means the conversation outside the building is missing something important. This isn't about crowning Shedeur as a finished product. It's about why the people who understand this game at the highest level keep circling back to the same idea, that the raw material is there, the mindset is right, and the situation around him might be the real variable no one wants to talk about yet. And once you hear who is backing him, it becomes impossible to see this story the same way again. The conversation around Shedeur Sanders feels loud right now, but what really matters is who is speaking. Because when criticism comes from hot takes and online debates, it's easy to dismiss. But when Hall of Famers and NFL legends start weighing in, the tone of the conversation changes completely. These aren't people chasing clicks. These are players who have survived broken pockets, bad coaching, media pressure, and unforgiving locker rooms, and they recognize patterns when they see them. Take Thurman Thomas. Instead of piling onto Shedeur, he flipped the lens entirely. He pointed straight at the environment, the offensive line struggles, the confusion, even the now infamous wrong wristband situation. His takeaway wasn't that Shedeur was failing. It was that Shedeur was still producing despite chaos and believing in himself through it. That's not an excuse, that's context. Then there's Fred Taylor, who focused on something fans rarely credit young quarterbacks for: composure. Taylor didn't talk about stats or highlights. He talked about how Shedeur carries himself. Same demeanor after a big play. Same demeanor after a hit. Same demeanor when the media is waiting for cracks to show. For former players, that steadiness matters more than raw numbers early on. And when a quarterback like Kurt Warner starts saying, "Those are NFL throws," that's not casual praise. Warner knows exactly what separates college success from professional viability. He acknowledged Shedeur isn't a finished product, but emphasized accuracy, touch, timing, and feel for the game. Traits you can't fake, traits that usually translate. What's striking is the consistency. These legends aren't coordinating narratives. They're coming to similar conclusions from different angles. They're not saying Shedeur is perfect. They're saying the foundation is real, and that matters far more than public perception at this stage. This is where the noise starts to lose credibility. Because when people who have actually been through the grinder push back on the dominant narrative, it forces a reset. Maybe the issue isn't confidence. Maybe it isn't arrogance. Maybe it's expectations colliding with reality too early. And once respected voices begin reframing the story, fans start asking a different question. Not what's wrong with Shedeur, but why so many greats see something others keep overlooking. And that shift in perspective is where the story truly starts to get interesting. When Thurman Thomas spoke about Shedeur Sanders, it didn't sound like praise designed to protect a young player. It sounded like honesty rooted in experience. And that's what made it uncomfortable. Instead of joining the crowd dissecting every mistake Shedeur makes, Thomas immediately redirected the conversation to the one place most people try to avoid: the environment around him, specifically the offensive line. According to Thomas, the issues up front weren't just bad, they were embarrassing. Missed assignments, confusion, breakdowns that leave a quarterback exposed before a play can even breathe. That context matters. Thomas pointed out that when a quarterback is under constant pressure, it forces habits that fans later criticize. Holding the ball too long, scrambling unnecessarily, trying to make something happen instead of taking the safe option. Those aren't personality flaws, they're survival instincts. And Thomas made it clear that judging Shedeur without acknowledging that reality is unfair. Then came the moment that really turned heads. Thomas referenced the wristband confusion, the wrong play tag being sent out onto the field. For a Hall of Famer to bring that up publicly wasn't accidental. That's not a minor mistake. That's organizational dysfunction leaking into live action. And when those kinds of errors happen, the quarterback takes the hit, literally and figuratively, while others escape scrutiny. What made Thomas' comments powerful wasn't that he defended Shedeur blindly. It was that he balanced critique with belief. He openly acknowledged that Shedeur wants to make big plays, that his confidence pushes him to extend plays longer than he should at times. But instead of framing that as arrogance, Thomas framed it as ambition, the same drive that separates average quarterbacks from great ones when it's eventually refined. And then he said the quiet part out loud. Shedeur believes he's going to be a top quarterback in this league. Not someday, eventually. That belief doesn't come from hype. It comes from self-assurance built long before the NFL spotlight. And Thomas didn't criticize that mindset. He endorsed it. That endorsement matters. Because when a Hall of Fame running back, someone who's seen quarterbacks crumble under far less pressure, says the issue isn't the player but the structure around him, it forces a reframing of the conversation. Suddenly, the narrative is, why is Shedeur struggling? It becomes, why is he being asked to survive instead of develop? Thomas didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't excuse mistakes. He simply reminded people that quarterbacks don't grow in chaos, they endure it. And the fact that Shedeur is still producing flashes, still believing, still standing tall in the middle of it all, that's not a weakness. That's the part Thurman Thomas wanted everyone to notice, whether they were ready to hear it or not. This is where the conversation around Shedeur Sanders gets twisted, and honestly, unfair. Some people hear confidence and immediately label it arrogance. They see swagger and assume entitlement. But inside NFL locker rooms, that mindset is often viewed very differently. Confidence isn't a luxury for quarterbacks, it's a requirement. And the ones who lack it don't last long. That's exactly why voices like Fred Taylor matter so much in this discussion. Taylor didn't focus on stats or win-loss records. He talked about how Shedeur carries himself. Same demeanor after pressure, same demeanor after criticism, same demeanor whether things are going right or falling apart. For former players, that consistency isn't arrogance, it's emotional control. It's professionalism. And here's the part critics tend to ignore. Shedeur has never leaned on excuses. Listen closely to his interviews. When things go wrong, he doesn't blame protection. He doesn't call out coaches. He doesn't point fingers. He frames everything as adversity that needs to be overcome. That's not deflection, that's accountability. And yet, because he doesn't sound defeated or apologetic, some people read that as ego. That's the disconnect. There's a massive difference between humility and self-destruction. Humility is understanding you're not perfect. Self-destruction is talking yourself out of believing you belong. Shedeur walks that line carefully. He acknowledges mistakes, but he refuses to shrink himself to make others comfortable. That confidence didn't appear overnight. Growing up around greatness sets a different baseline. Being raised by someone like Deion Sanders means expectations are higher, standards are louder, and belief is non-negotiable. But belief doesn't mean entitlement. It means preparation meets self-trust. Former players recognize that immediately. They know quarterbacks who hesitate mentally, emotionally, get eaten alive. They also know confidence often gets criticized before it gets celebrated, especially when it comes from young players who don't follow the traditional script of being quiet, grateful, and invisible. What Fred Taylor highlighted wasn't swagger for cameras. It was composure under pressure, enjoyment of the game, understanding that football at its core is still a game, even when millions are watching and judging. And that's why this narrative matters. Because when confidence gets mislabeled as arrogance, development gets misunderstood. Fans start demanding personality changes instead of structural fixes. They focus on tone instead of context, and they miss the bigger picture entirely. Shedeur's confidence isn't the obstacle. If anything, it's the reason he's still standing upright, mentally and emotionally, in a situation that's tested far more experienced quarterbacks. And once you understand that distinction, the conversation shifts from "why is he like this?" to "how many young quarterbacks could survive this and still believe?" This is where the conversation shifts from personality to pure football. Because when a Hall of Fame quarterback says, "Those are NFL throws," that isn't casual praise, it's a technical evaluation. And that's exactly what Kurt Warner brought to the table when he broke down Shedeur Sanders on tape. Warner didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't say Shedeur is a finished product. In fact, he made it clear that growth is still needed, which is normal for any young quarterback. But what stood out was what Warner did emphasize: accuracy, touch, timing, and feel. Those are the traits that separate quarterbacks who survive from quarterbacks who lead franchises. According to Warner, Shedeur has already shown the ability to make throws that only work at the NFL level. Tight window completions, layered passes over defenders, balls thrown with anticipation rather than hesitation. These aren't plays that rely on broken coverages or athletic improvisation. They're reads and releases that require trust in your eyes and mechanics. And that's the key point. NFL throws aren't about arm strength alone. They're about throwing a receiver open before the window fully appears. They're about ball placement that protects your target from hits. They're about knowing when to take a calculated risk and when to live for the next down. Warner highlighted that Shedeur consistently flashes those instincts, even while operating behind unstable protection. That context matters. Most young quarterbacks struggle to display touch and timing when pressure collapses the pocket early. They rush mechanics. They abandon progressions. They panic. Warner noted that Shedeur, even when hurried, still shows moments of composure that translate directly to the next level. That's not common, especially this early. What makes Warner's evaluation more impactful is his perspective. He's seen quarterbacks with elite tools fail because they never mastered the details. He's also seen overlooked players thrive because they understood timing, leverage, and rhythm. When Warner says Shedeur has earned the right to be viewed as a potential franchise quarterback, that's not hype, that's earned credibility. And once that phrase enters the conversation, the tone changes. Because now, the debate isn't about whether Shedeur belongs in the league. It's about how fast his development can accelerate once structure, protection, and continuity catch up to his skill set. Warner didn't promise superstardom. He did something more important. He validated the foundation. And in the NFL, foundations matter far more than headlines. Because arm talent can get you drafted, Athleticism can get you snaps, but consistent NFL throws, those are what keep you starting. And once respected evaluators agree those throws are already on tape, the question stops being if, and becomes when everything else finally aligns around him. When John Elway weighs in on a young quarterback, people listen not because of nostalgia, but because he's seen this movie play out from every angle. And when Elway talked about Shedeur Sanders, his message wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was a warning, a familiar one. Elway didn't question Shedeur's talent. In fact, he went out of his way to say the opposite. He talked about arm ability, mobility, feel for the game, and the capacity to make every throw required at the NFL level. That part was clear. What Elway focused on instead was something far more important: where and how a quarterback develops. Because talent alone doesn't protect you in this league. Elway emphasized that the jump from college to the NFL is massive, especially for quarterbacks. Faster windows, tighter coverage, more complex defenses. And when a young QB is dropped into that environment without structure, patience, and protection, things can unravel quickly. Not because the player isn't good, but because the environment isn't ready. That's where his comments quietly hit home. Elway referenced the importance of the right situation, a coaching staff aligned on development, an offensive coordinator willing to build around strengths instead of forcing a system, a quarterback coach invested in details, and most importantly, an organization willing to bring a young QB along step by step instead of rushing results. Fans immediately connected the dots. Around the league, there are countless examples of gifted quarterbacks who were thrown into chaos and never recovered. Elway didn't name names, but the implication was obvious. Structure isn't a luxury, it's survival. And when that structure is missing, even elite talent can get labeled as disappointing before it ever has a fair chance. That's why his comments about Shedeur mattered so much. Elway wasn't selling hype. He was advocating patience. He was saying, if this quarterback lands in the right ecosystem, the ceiling changes completely. And when someone with Elway's resume frames it that way, it reinforces what other legends have already hinted at, that Shedeur's biggest variable isn't mindset or ability. It's environment. To be clear, Elway didn't criticize any specific team. He didn't accuse anyone of mishandling anything. He simply laid out a reality the league has ignored too often. Quarterbacks don't develop in isolation. They develop inside systems, good or bad. And when you listen to Elway alongside voices like Kurt Warner, Thurman Thomas, and Fred Taylor, a pattern emerges. Not excuses, not spin. Just a consistent reminder that before judging the outcome, you better examine the setup. Because in the NFL, the wrong situation can bury talent fast. But the right one, it can turn quiet confidence into something the entire league has to reckon with. What's happening around Shedeur Sanders right now isn't loud, and that's exactly why it matters. In the NFL, real reevaluations don't start with headlines. They start with tone shifts, subtle changes in how people talk, questions that stop getting asked, assumptions that quietly fade away. And if you've been paying attention, there are signs that the league's internal conversation around Shedeur may already be changing. Not publicly, not officially, but quietly. Early in the season, the dominant debate was whether teams should already be looking for another quarterback. Draft boards, mock scenarios, replacement talk. But lately, that conversation hasn't been nearly as aggressive. Analysts and former executives are spending less time asking who replaces him and more time asking what needs to change around him. That's a meaningful shift. It doesn't mean the league has crowned him anything. It means doubt is being redirected. Some reports and discussions suggest teams are taking a closer look at context, offensive line instability, coaching transitions, scheme fit, and protection breakdowns. Again, none of this is confirmed reporting. This is league chatter, tone, and inference. But in NFL circles, perception often moves before decisions do. What's especially telling is how veteran voices are framing their takes. Instead of saying he's not ready, they're saying he's not finished. Instead of questioning his ceiling, they're questioning the infrastructure. That distinction is huge. Because once the conversation shifts from talent evaluation to environmental evaluation, a quarterback has already cleared the first major hurdle. And this isn't happening in isolation. The league has seen this story before. Young quarterbacks placed into unstable situations get labeled too early. Then, years later, people look back and admit the setup failed them before they failed themselves. That hindsight is what makes teams cautious now, even if they don't say it out loud. What Shedeur is doing, intentionally or not, is forcing patience into the conversation. By continuing to flash high-level throws, maintain composure, and show resilience under pressure, he's making it harder to write him off cleanly. And in the NFL, when front offices can't reach consensus on dismissal, reevaluation naturally follows. This doesn't mean every team suddenly believes in him. It means fewer teams are dismissing him. And that's how trajectories quietly change, not with viral moments, not with apologies, but with hesitation replacing certainty, with analysts choosing their words more carefully, with executives asking follow-up questions instead of closing the book. The league may not be ready to say it publicly, but the shift is there. The question now is whether Shedeur belongs. It's whether the league judged him too quickly before understanding the full picture, and whether they're already, quietly, starting to correct that mistake. When you step back and look at the full picture, the story around Shedeur Sanders becomes a lot less about noise, and a lot more about timing, patience, and perception. From the outside, it's easy to simplify things. Wins, losses, stats, draft position. But the people who know this league best rarely judge quarterbacks that way. They look at context, structure, growth under pressure. And that's why the most meaningful support Shedeur has received hasn't come from fans or social media. It's come from Hall of Famers, former MVPs, and executives who have seen talent ruined by bad situations and elevated by the right ones. What stands out is that everyone agrees Shedeur is already a star. It's that so many respected voices agree on the same foundation. The tools are real, the mindset is strong, and the confidence hasn't cracked, even when the circumstances easily could have broken it. That matters, because confidence that survives chaos is different from confidence that only exists when everything is perfect. The uncomfortable truth is this: NFL narratives often harden before players are fully evaluated. Once a label sticks, overhyped, too confident, not ready, it takes years to peel it back, even when evidence starts pushing the other direction. And in Shedeur's case, that label may have formed faster than it should have. That doesn't mean he's above criticism. Growth is still required. Refinement is still coming. No one credible has claimed otherwise. But there's a growing gap between what casual conversations say and what experienced football minds are actually seeing on tape. And gaps like that don't stay open forever. Eventually, performance forces a reckoning, not overnight. Not with headlines, but slowly, with reevaluations, quieter conversations, and fewer people willing to dismiss the player outright. That's where Shedeur's story feels like it's heading now. Not toward instant validation, but toward reconsideration. Which brings us to the lingering question. How many quarterbacks never get this second look because the league decides too quickly? And how many conversations would sound different if context mattered as much as conclusions? Shedeur Sanders may not control how long it takes for narratives to shift, but he does control whether they have to. And if the people who have been right before are already telling us to slow down and look again, it might be worth asking whether this story was ever about lack of ability, or simply about how long the NFL is willing to wait before admitting it judged too early.